You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Hello, Music Tectonics community. I'm Dmitri, CEO of Rock, Paper, Scissors, the PR and marketing firm that specializes in music tech and innovation. On today's episode, we talk with Cherie Hu. She's a researcher, a founder, and an educator forging new paths in music, technology, and business. At Water and Music, Cherie tracks ownership of music tech companies, the focus of today's episode. Our conversation's pretty wide-ranging. We talk about the shifting power dynamics between the major labels and the independents, the impact of AI, particularly generative AI, and trends in rights management and live music. We also talk about her innovative career path and the transformation of her music tech research and consulting firm, Water and Music. It's a great conversation. But first, the news.
Rock, paper, scanner.
And we do have some news, right, Tristra?
We do. That's right.
I want to kick off because when I was scanning the news this week, something that kind of caught my eye was a Billboard story by Elizabeth Diltz Marshall. Reverb sold by Etsy to Fender parent and firm led by Soundcloud Alum. I'm a big fan of Reverb, so it's really interesting to see what they do. And I was surprised and excited when Etsy bought Reverb to see if they were going to do anything bigger or whatever. I think Etsy was just realizing they needed to compete with eBay and Amazon.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure I like what happened with Etsy, honestly.
Yeah, I don't know if they seem to have thought about things in a strange way, especially how Reverb, though, I mean, they do sell vintage items and
they started as
handmade.
Etsy started as having this really strong identity around maker culture, and people were, they figured out an eBay or an Amazon for makers of all sorts of like homemade jewelry and clothing and all that kind of stuff. But then they widened out, and now you're not always sure what you're getting from Etsy. So I think Reverb probably...
There's a lot of drop shippers.
Yes, exactly. And I think Reverb probably maybe didn't have the growth or excitement or anything under the larger mission that Etsy was under. And sometimes when you buy a company, it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's kind of exciting that some music-related companies and investors bought Reverb. By the way, Reverb is an online marketplace for musical instruments and equipment. So if you don't know, that's who they are. But what I found interesting is not only is investment firm Creator Partners one of the people that bought it from Etsy, one of the entities, which is headed by Carrie Trainer, who's a former SoundCloud CEO, but also the company Servco, which owns Fender, bought them. And I dug into Servco a little bit, Tristra. I didn't know anything about them. I was like, that's a very strange name. What is that? Servco was started as a two-car repair garage in Hawaii many years ago, like in the early 1900s. I was going to say in the 1900s, but I think it was like the early 1900s. And then they started like acquiring rights to sell cars, and they became car dealers, and they've worked across multiple car companies. They ended up diversifying, but it turns out that Fender's founder, Leo Fender, I think is his name, was a slide key guitar player. That's what he played, which is the instrument used in Hawaiian music. And so there was always this connection between Hawaii and Fender, and Servco, when they were diversifying, decided to go into an area they were interested in, which was music. So in addition to being this huge car, automotive, and furniture business, they bought Fender. And now that company owns Reverb, which is super interesting. The other interesting thing about this is that Servco had to do some interesting things like go into used autos and things like that during wartime. And so it made me think this is one of the things that really got me interested that somebody's buying Reverb right now is with the increase of tariffs on musical instruments. It's going to be a challenge for musical instrument manufacturers. But it means that Reverb might be back in the spotlight in terms of a growth area because people will be able to buy instruments from each other. So it's a really smart move.
And secondhand and thrifting online has really taken off. So it had a slow start. There were a bunch of startups working in, whether you're talking about Poshmark or Threads Up, for clothing and shoes and accessories, that kind of thing, fashion. But they're churning along. More and more people are willing to thrift or buy secondhand online.
And what's interesting is I think Fender has a certified pre-owned program as well, which they work with Reverb on as well. So that's super interesting. I think for the musical instrument manufacturers who might be faced with some tariff issues, growth in expenses, decline in sales, if they get into the used instrument business in a way that helps their bottom line, that's super interesting.
Yeah, that is really cool.
One other thing I found out is Creator Partners, who's one of the buyers of this, have also invested in SoundCloud, Mogul, Fender, Jukebox, JKBX, or now I think they respelled it, but that's Scott Cohen initiated company, Vimeo. So they're in the music space. But Fender also, I've read up a little bit on their online education program as well. And that really exploded during the pandemic. So I think, Fender's probably looking at what happened during the pandemic and made a quick move around this Reverb thing because of the tariffs and what the shifts will be in consumption too, but maybe to grow out their online education program some more. Again, get another burst there.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool.
So really interesting news there on the musical instrument front. Looking forward to seeing what happens there with Reverb, now with music ownership, which is super awesome. And people who go back 90 plus years and investing in musical instruments and things like that. Trisha, what are you looking at? What articles did you come across?
Well, I saw something curious on Hypebeast of all places. I know I probably don't fit the profile of a sneakerhead or a typical Hypebeast reader, but they did have a really interesting little, very mysterious article about A24, the sort of film production house, going into music. So A24 has been dropping little hints on socials that they are starting a music realm. So if you're not familiar with A24, they've been kind of a bright light in a sort of dim and murky world of cinema recently, like pretty much an indie film powerhouse. And they've produced some pretty remarkable films like Moonlight, and there's a whole list of other ones. They have their own distinctive style. The way there's this sort of Netflix look for some shows, there's definitely an A24 look and vibe.
They're the ones that did Everything Everywhere All at Once, for example. That's a reference point, a recent reference.
Exactly. Probably a better one for music tech than some of the more artsy ones. But but it's really cool. It's cool to hear that they may be going into music.
Do we know what they're doing with music?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Hypebeast was pretty vague. It was vague beasting.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be interesting to see. It looks like it's going to be a thing. So A24, if anyone's out there, let us know what you're up to. I want to hear some of your stuff.
Speaking of vague, there was an article in Entrepreneur called "You Are Somehow a Villain If You Use It. Tons of music producers are secretly using AI. New study reveals." I think both of us caught this one. And what a compelling headline.
Yeah, great headline.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is it's a thought leadership piece by Helmut Bem, CEO of SonarWorks. And it starts off talking about a survey, but they don't really talk about the survey very much.
And they don't really link to the survey. I was a little annoyed at that. I didn't really see a lot of info on the survey itself. What do you think, Dmitri? Do you think it's really a secret? Are producers really keeping it a secret?
I don't know. I don't know if they are. I think the point, and it looks like it was a survey of 100 music industry professionals and music consumers. So pretty small, but a good excuse to have this conversation. And I think their point was there's a lot of concern about it. People don't want to talk about it, but then in the background, they're actually using a lot of AI tools. It feels like there's plenty of people talking about it. And I feel like there's plenty of people who are distinguishing between which are the tools that help creativity and which are the ones that kind of try to replace human creativity. Although that's a whole debate I'd love to have with you as well, Trisha. But I don't know. Are you thinking people are being secret about it?
I think it really depends on what the AI is doing. Like, I don't think anyone is secretive about using AI mastering in different parts of their process. Right. And there are lots of AI-powered VSTs that I think people are using, or machine learning, algorithmic VSTs, effects, etc. Like anything that's like room modeling probably has some machine learning in there, right? At some point.
Oh, sure.
So I don't know. I think... But then producers aren't necessarily. We were just having a little before we started recording. We were having a funny little conversation about about DAW battles and people having beefs with one another over what they use, if it's their DAW. But I don't know. There of course are producer influencers and people who love to talk about how they do different things in the studio. But most people who are producing who aren't playing that particular role aren't going around talking about, I'm just posting on socials about all the VSTs I use, right? These are
in some cases you might say, oh, I don't want to talk too much about what tools or what samples or what libraries I'm using because I actually want my song to stand out from other people.
Yeah, I don't want people to copy me, or this is just part of my process. I don't have time to talk about those kind of things. I just make music. Like, all that's legitimate. So I'm not sure if it's as dirty a secret. There are definitely factions within the producer world that really, or mixing engineers that really dislike the thought of AI doing certain parts of their tasks. But I also think they're kind of excited by getting rid of some of the more boring stuff, like bouncing mixes back and forth. If you had an AI agent that would take care of that kind of process, which is just excruciatingly boring and annoying.
Or using voice to set your DAW to the settings you want for a particular song. Maybe you have 12 templates that you use, or variations of 12 templates that you use, and you could actually tell your DAW, okay, for this one I want to do that, instead of thinking what are the exact knobs to turn or settings to drop down, etc.
I talked to one producer who really liked running things through an AI mixer or mastering engine because it did really weird stuff sometimes like that kind of made him think.
The errors helped.
Yeah, like it was like, wow, it did something crazy to the bridge, and that really made it pop. And while I'm going to adjust that because it's like really over the top, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, this dilemma between like the ethics of AI, whether it's licensed training data or who owns the output at the other end, because you've got both input and output ethical dilemmas around ownership and intellectual property and payout, monetization, and so forth. But in between, if you can get rid of those two ethical sides of the discussion, it's another tool. And you could use randomizers like you're talking about to come up with new creative ideas, or shortcuts that we were talking about before, et cetera. So it's a good article to raise those questions and so forth. But I think we might have said more about it than they said about it.
We had more substance in the article,
helmets.
Frankly. But
thanks for bringing it up.
But helmets, we would love to talk more about that survey if you want to share.
And I love it when people do surveys like that as an opportunity for thought leadership as well. So anyway, let's widen out. Tristra, did you find anything that's like bigger? Like we jumped in the weeds here.
I'm going to whip out my hobby horse as a PR professional and talk about an article I saw from the always interesting Jamie Dimon. I have to say, of all the financial CEOs out there in the world, Jamie Dimon often says stuff that I find pretty.
This is the CEO of JPMorgan?
Correct. So he has been going around talking about how something that I pulled this article from futurism.com. It says something everyone can agree on: kill meetings and corporate jargon. So I could not agree more that corporate jargon, or I think as Diamond puts it, management pablum, which I think is a great phrase, is killing how we communicate, specifically about things like AI. And this has been a topic we've had a lot of discussion around at RPS with clients and on the Music Tectonics podcast. But jargon makes your text dead. If you want to kill your communication, both the message and the emotion, the human reaction to what you're trying to tell people, just use lots of jargon. Go ahead. That sounds like a great idea. If you want your message to live and be vibrant and connect with people emotionally and signal there's a human here who cares and I want you to care, you got to come up with another way to talk. And so if you just run your ideas or texts through what I affectionately like to call chatty, chat GPT, chatty G, you're going to wind up with a text that sounds like basically had the life beaten out of it. So if you do that, edit, go back, have fun, be a little weird, quirky, try something new, like use all of the words in our beautiful English language and do what Jamie Dimon says. He's the CEO of a big financial company. He knows some things, like don't rely on your pablum.
Hey, let me ask you something, Trisha. Why do you think people use jargon? Because I think that gets to the source of changing the behavior.
Here's my take, and I would love everyone's feedback on this. I think we believe there is a social expectation that we talk a certain way. And instead of talking like the people we are, who have our knowledge base and expertise that we have, we end up trying to parrot what sounds like a real CEO talking, right? Or this is the way a technology company should write. And instead of thinking about how do I want to write? How do I want to express myself in words? And being bold enough to be slightly individual about it. Yeah, you want to use terms other people are going to understand. There are terms of art, there are technical terms, and there are ways to work around or work with all of those. But you have to be brave enough to sound like you. No one else can sound like you. Everyone else is taken, right?
So it's like the crazy pants of language.
Yeah, and everyone has their version of that. You may have the beautiful pencil skirt, you may have the crazy fascinator hat, whatever it is, find it. Because if you can find it and use it consistently, you will sound unlike everyone else and people will notice and they'll hear your actual message instead of just hearing, here's a dumb technology firm tooting their own horn about something stupid, right? That's what you hear when you see a jargon-filled press release. That's what I hear, at least. No offense, but
Our chief strategist,
just saying.
our chief strategy officer, Trisha, has taken over the Rock, Paper, Scanner news roundup on music tectonics. Hey, that was tons of fun. Got a little advice in there as well. Great to see your expertise shining there. Let's do this again.
Oh, absolutely. Talk to you soon.
Now for our feature interview.
Cherie Hu has over a decade of experience as a music industry analyst with a focus on the cutting edge of music and tech. She runs her own research and consulting firm, Water and Music, which serves thousands of industry leaders on music tech market research and strategy, especially in areas like generative AI, Web3, gaming, and direct-to-fan platforms. Previously, she served as a columnist for publications including Billboard, Forbes, and Music Business Worldwide. I've been a fan from the beginning. Welcome back to the podcast, Cherie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, it feels like a long time coming.
It's been a while. It's true.
Yeah.
We're focused on some of the research and work you've been doing over several years around investment in music tech. Why don't we kick off? What is the Music Tech Ownership Ouroboros project, and why did Water and Music start it?
Yes, the Music Tech Ownership Ouroboros is a sprawling, ever-growing map of ownership and investment stakes in music tech and music rights companies, especially the growing stakes that are being eaten up by private equity firms, institutional investors and banks, media conglomerates and tech conglomerates like Tencent globally, even government funds like coming out of Saudi Arabia. So I guess there are a few points I wanted to make with the Ouroboros, which for those listening who don't know what that is, it is a mythical serpent eating its own tail. So I think that's what's happening with the music tech landscape, is that there are so many intertwined business interests, especially among different groups of buyers and sellers who you wouldn't previously have associated government funds or big tech conglomerates with even independent labels or independent artist services. So one, those relationships are becoming even more intertwined. Two, specifically, there are some very specific major players that come out of this. So the way that I designed the Ouroboros, which is just using a FigJam board, for those who know FigJam, enjoy brainstorming. At the center of the Ouroboros is, I believe, Tencent Holdings and Universal. I think to an extent, so many different distributors, streaming services, even earlier stage startups can be traced back to Tencent or Universal, or to one of their competitors in big tech or in the major label world, in terms of these companies increasingly trying to own stakes in the next generation of music tech. And I guess the third point, more speaking from an independent music perspective, I think so this topic got on a lot of people's radars when Universal announced that they were in talks or were planning to acquire Downtown, one of the largest independent music services companies in the world. They have a lot of distribution business, but also publishing, admin, accounting. They have access to a lot of indie labels, financial data as well. But that really is just, that's actually the rule and not the exception, I think is also a point I wanted to make with this Ouroboros, that there's so many independent music services that you might not know because it's not super public, but they are actually majority owned by private equity or received an investment from a similar firm in recent years. So that raises a question for the independent music community on kind of the health of this ecosystem from a power and ownership perspective. What happens when more and more of these tools do become more consolidated under just a handful of people? What does the market look like for tools and services that can actually like stay independent in serving the independent music sector? So yeah, those are just three of the top things that come to mind. But as the last thing, the way that I designed the Ouroboros is meant for self-exploration. So my intention is for people to get their own takeaways from digging more into the data. Those are just some suggested themes to look into as a starting point.
Yeah, it's the thing that I don't think you mentioned, which I noticed, is yes, there's a graphic, an infographic that shows the relationships with all these lines that point to everything. And it is big. Like you can't really look at the whole thing on a regular computer screen. You need like a projector, or you need to be like hand scrolling left and right or up and down. You're constantly looking. It's almost like a maze. And the other piece is it really is the dragon eating its own tail, because you'll see this company has invested in this company, which then has bought this company, which has invested in the original company. And it really is, there's multiple circles, overlapping circles of what, and you're like, wait a second. It's not just that there's a handful of big companies. Several of these big companies are invested in each other mutually, which is crazy to see.
Yep. So the origin of the Ouroboros was, I think this was definitely pre-COVID. I want to say around 2017, when Spotify and Tencent announced what was called an equity swap. So exactly what you just described. I think they both purchased around 7 to 9% of a stake in the other company. And I knew that Tencent had stakes in the major labels, and I knew that the major labels had stakes in Spotify. So immediately I was like, what is going on? Is there a way that I can map this out just to understand? So I made the Ouroboros definitely first and foremost from my own curiosity and just my need to understand what was going on. So it's been really great and reassuring to see that other people have been wondering similar things, or that just like my own mapping for my own use has been helpful for other people as well.
And to me, that's such a Cherie Hu water and music thing, to map something out, to say, I'm not just going to talk about this stuff, but I want to back out and see the full pattern. And then that becomes a helpful tool for the rest of us. So it's the graphical element. This is one of those situations where it's like, you couldn't even understand it in narrative form. You have to see it as a picture. So that's super cool. And you updated the infographic and the analysis on music tech ownership earlier this year. You've done it, I don't know if it's every year, every couple years, where you look back and see who's invested and who's bought whom and so forth. What were your top 3 or 4 insights from the latest review you did this year?
Yes, a few immediate answers. So in terms of how frequently I update it, it used to be once a year, but investment activity has increased, or I'm like, as more people become aware of it, I hear about more and more deals, to the point where I try to update it once a month, and there are always at least 4 or 5 new deals to put on the map. So it's definitely growing quite quickly. In terms of highlights from last year, I would say I was intrigued by how many of the largest acquisitions or investments, let's actually start with investments. A lot of the largest investments in newer music companies involved merging rights and tech in some way. I'll call out a specific example of an investor who's become really active in this space called FlexPoint Forward. They're a private, also growth equity firm based primarily in Chicago, I think. And they last year announced 2 investments in 2 music rights tech vehicles. One is Create Music Group, which has been around for a very long time. They have built really good software for more like YouTube and UGC royalty revenue management. But now they are increasingly buying out their own rights. So acquiring labels and publishers, and then using the tech that they have to the flywheel effect to increase the value and optimize the catalogs that they own. So they, for all intents and purposes, for Water Music was like a music tech company, but they are increasingly like a tech-enabled rights company. So that's where the categorization starts to blur a little bit. FlexPoint Forward also invested in a company called Duetti, which is using a lot of sophisticated analysis to identify targets in terms of indie artists for buying out their back catalog, and then actively marketing those catalogs, trying to increase their value. Similar to a Hypnosis, but not like a publicly traded fund, and definitely more independent artist focused. They are definitely tech-enabled rights because none of their tech is really available publicly. Like, they don't really offer tools for other artists to value their own catalogs. It's all for internal use for the purpose of optimizing the value of their catalog investments. Yeah, I guess in this span of like music tech, that's been one of the most interesting trends for me.
I want to hear about the other trends, but I have a follow-up because I was going to ask you this anyway. Mm-hmm. So in this Ouroboros analysis, the infographic and the research and report, it sounds like the line between rights acquisition and ownership is blurring with music and music tech specifically. So when I'm looking at this, Does it include the hypnosises and the primary waves of the world, or it only includes those if they have a tech element?
Yes, the Ouroboros scope is broader. So I believe Hypnosis is on there through their acquisition by Blackstone. There are some other catalogs like FlexPoint invested in Network Music Group, which is, I think, primarily a label and music rights company. When it comes to valuing like the music tech market, which I guess is a separate question and
Right.
not like beyond the Ouroboros, I prefer to keep as much as possible on software, or if the majority of the company's business is coming from primarily software or selling tech in some way. It is blurring though in certain areas, especially when you look at rights management or people working in like the artist marketing sphere. It can blur a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. That's a great insight that you're just seeing a lot of that blurring happening. It's interesting because when you see these roll ups like Downtown and other companies that have bought up, they may start with IP ownership of the actual rights of the songs or the recordings, and then they'll add a tech component, and then they might get out of the rights component completely and say we're only a services company as well. So that I'll take that as one of your insights of sort of that is definitely shifting more in that direction.
Yeah, that's interesting because Downtown separated the two. Cobalt definitely separated the two with AWOL spinning off and then getting bought out by Sony. There always is this question of this appetite for seeing what like the next iteration of a record label would look like. Whether you're in the mindset of totally disrupting the industry and saying we're not going to own any rights, down with the majors, let's like build our own tech thing from the ground up. Or what I think Create is doing, which is like really taking a lot from a traditional label playbook in a lot of ways, but just applying a lot more sophisticated tech and just having a lot more intelligence on where people are actually discovering and consuming music today. So yeah, I guess it's a pendulum. It might be swinging a little bit back in the original direction.
Got you. All right. You were going through other insights from the latest review. What other insights did you draw from this last year of investments and acquisitions?
Yeah, so rights was a big trend. And I guess to zoom out, at Water Music, every year we do look at high level investment and acquisition trends at every stage. So the Ouroboros is definitely more focused on later stage, growth stage companies, but we also look at like seed stage, early stage, and then all the way to exit. And we mapped out across all those stages what were the top trends or what were the top verticals. Rights management was one of the top. And a general takeaway for us looking at that whole cycle is a phrase that I've coined: boring is back. We're not in early COVID anymore when I feel like cash was really cheap and investors, people in general, were throwing a lot of money at very shiny objects or just very early stage experiments, just because that was really the industry mindset at the time. Obviously, the macroeconomic conditions right now are super different. Investors in any industry, they want actual revenue. Like they want to see that you actually have traction in a real business. They're not as gung-ho and getting behind like these super moonshot ideas. So how that's reflected in music is that traditional core revenue streams that are nothing new are coming back to the forefront and ranking at the top. So that's rights management, that's live. So a lot of the startups that we saw get a lot of funding, work in the ticketing, festival, merch business. I think one of the biggest investments of last year was in a company called At Venue, which just does like on-premise e-commerce food and beverage sales management for a lot of big venues. And they, as a result of that, they have a lot of data on what is a live music fan consumer actually spending on? How does that differ across genre, across markets? It's super valuable data, especially in the current kind of fandom hype era. Yeah, so live in general, also really big topic. And then in terms of any interest in emerging tech, it is completely all on AI right now. There isn't as much interest from the investor standpoint in metaverse or Web3 or gaming. I think there are still so many smart people working in all those spaces, but it's very much in build mode and let's see what we can actually ship to market versus let's wait for all this flush of capital to come in so we can throw anything at the wall. So yeah, boring is back. A lot of the splashiest deals were not like innovative in the sense of like genuinely bringing something new, but rather bringing more sophisticated analytics to revenue streams that have been around in the industry for decades and just haven't gotten perhaps the right tech treatment that we would expect in other industries.
So innovation in the back office is what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Even the downtown acquisition, I would say most of their tech is distributed back office tech, whether it's like for accounting or publishing admin, helping to collect royalties from DSPs. It's all like very critical back office work.
Well, I want to ask you a little bit about the pulse/size of the music tech startup investment space. But were there any other insights you wanted to pull out from the last year? I know you hit on two pretty big ones there around rights management, around and boring is bad.
Yeah, other takeaways from the last year of investment. I'll share a bit more on the Gen AI side, just because a tech story and debate and kind of a litmus test for where people think the industry is going, that's been like by far the top trend. That said, we're taping this in April 2025. To my understanding, the last time that a big music AI generator announced funding was 11 months ago. So that was when Suno announced their $125 million round. I think just a month after that is when all the lawsuits came out from the major labels against Suno and Udio. Since then, there's been, on the music AI generation side, so the model of write a prompt, out pops a song, that has gone more quiet on the investment side. Again, like not to say there's no activity at all. There are so many different tools out there, but just in terms of where investors are putting their checks, a lot of it is still going into AI for music, but not in a full generation sense. Instead, there's a lot of investor focus on specific use cases like audio shake for stem separation. There's a lot of momentum around AI and rights management. Startups like Musical AI that are trying to apply attribution to AI models. So being able to attribute outputs to specific pieces of training input and then pay out royalties accordingly, which I think rights holders would love. So there's a lot more momentum. There's still a lot of momentum in music AI, but investor interest is increasingly coalescing around more B2B specialized use cases as opposed to the Suno model, which I think that they're making a super ambitious consumer bet on like this change in behavior where people will not only want to make their own songs, but also listen to other songs that are AI generated. It's very different theses. So yeah, I guess that to wrap up my high level thoughts on AI, it's definitely not a monolith. I think that's a very important point to keep in mind, that there are so many different segments, so many different target users, and then corresponding differences in investor interest.
Has investment across the music tech startup world been lower in 2024 and 2025 than previous? I don't know if you have the actual quantitative. Like when we're talking to startups, it feels like more of them are struggling to get investment at the moment. And that looks like, other than AI, and I don't necessarily mean music AI, but across the entire tech space, AI is really taking up a lot of the oxygen around investment. Do you also either have the feeling or the data that music tech startup investment has been lower in 2024 and into 2025?
Yes, comparing the data that we have with data from another great music tech org called Music Ally, based in the UK, and they have been tracking investments dating all the way back to 2014, 2015. So I was curious looking back at the data that they have. So comparing Music Ally's data in 2015 versus Water Music's data 2024, the deal flow in terms of the number of deals, at least being publicly announced, has almost quadrupled. Oh, wow. So and I think that kind of corresponds to people's awareness of music tech as a category worth taking seriously, especially now that like so many major streaming services are publicly traded. Same with like the label side. There's a lot of investor awareness of the possibilities here from a tech standpoint. So deal flow has almost quadrupled, but the total amount of capital in this space has almost stayed the same. So I think for 2015 and 2024, the total was around $1 billion. I think slightly more back then. Also keeping in mind that is the floor, because I think both of us as organizations are looking at just publicly announced data. There's probably a lot that like hasn't been announced, but I think that's a good reference. there's a lot more activity and a lot more interest in building solutions for music. The amount of and the number of investors, I think, has also grown. They're just writing smaller checks. And I think especially as you have the Spotifys of the world going public or getting acquired, a lot of the like more mature, perhaps more attractive later stage music tech investments are like off the market, or they've gone off the market in over the last few years. And so energy is going all the way back more towards like pre-launch, very early stage. That's reflected in our data from last year. I think almost half of our list of investments that we tracked are early or seed stage. And that kind of tracks also with VC at large. Like VCs, there aren't that many startups raising Series B, Series C, D rounds, I think, this year.
Super helpful. All right, we have to take a quick break, but I want to dig into a couple topics. I do want to talk about AI more, not just on the investment landscape, but the Cherie Hu perspective on it and where it's going, especially with Gen AI and licensing and all that. And I also want to talk a little bit about what you started off with around the shift in power between majors and indies. We'll be right back.
Join the Music Tectonics team online May 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UK time for our next seismic activity, Artists' Careers in a Parallel Universe. We'll be joined by creators Clara Venice and Vivek Agrawal to hear how they're leveraging new technologies, building brand relationships in this new landscape, and monetizing their networks. Register for free and learn more about our monthly Seismic Activity online event series at musictectonics.com.
Okay, we're back. And before the break, we were talking a bit about AI and music. And up until the last quarter, I had thought that the Gen AI companies that train on unlicensed data would get sued out of existence. That's what I heard when I was in the hallways at conferences last year. But the change in power of maybe the court system in America and just the role of technology leaders now has me thinking that some of these larger tech companies and well-funded, as you described some of the Gen AI stuff, are going to succeed the way that maybe YouTube had succeeded by growing faster than regulation could stop them. And that labels and publishers' best hope might be to monetize music created using unlicensed training data. I'm curious, I know it's a little provocative, but I'm curious, do you agree? And does this increase the investability of Gen AI companies in music?
Okay, if there are a few layers
Yeah.
here. I do think Suno and Udio have strong enough legal teams and actually have submitted strong enough counter arguments about training data being fair use versus not, that I really am not married at this point to any specific outcome. And I definitely am pro like the music industry still continuing to exist and rights holders like still getting their fair share. But like a lot of people are comparing this to Napster, which totally makes sense in terms of the litigation that happened when at their peak. But based on my understanding of how like AI models work, most of how they're learning from training data is, it's not like sampling. It's not like directly taking training data and spitting it out. It's a lot more complicated. Even the most seasoned AI researchers still call it a black box. And there's so much research funding going into trying to explain what happens inside these models. And I know outside of music, it's still so messy. I'm like really not sure how these cases will play out. Suno and Udio's attorneys have indeed, I guess, defended Google and YouTube and all these big tech companies in the past too. So definitely that's like important history to keep in mind. That said, I think out of the investor conversations that I've had so far, the default stance is skepticism towards full stack generative AI. So like the Suno model of, again, just like writing a prompt and then producing a full song. I think because the outcome of the current cases is so up in the air. Like I think it's actually very hard to predict which way it'll go. It seems like even the Anthropic case, which has been going on for over a year now, is like still ongoing. Like the two parties haven't reached a settlement. So it makes me think that they actually do still want to go to court and have the case resolved that way. So yeah, I think the timeline will really be a few years to have this all shake out, which like seems like a really long time. But in the meantime, investors are, I think, default skeptical about full stack generative AI more interested in more specialized use cases or AI that like really understands a specific customer segment. I guess to give an example outside of music, there's a company called 11 Labs that does voice generation primarily and sound effects a little bit as well. They just raised their Series C, I think, and their valuation is at a few $1 billion. And so much of their business comes from servicing Fortune 500 clients. So they like, I think most of their business is B2B and helping them make voice AI agents or tools for like customer support, or they also work with a ton of YouTubers to translate all their videos into like dozen plus different languages. So there it's like full generative AI, but I think what makes 11 Labs stand out is that they like actually really understand their customer and what they need and building everything around that versus let's just put this tool out there and hope that people use it. It's very customer centric. So in some ways, going back to like the fundamentals of business as an AI company, do you actually understand what your customer wants and are you building relentlessly around that?
Yeah. And is it based on novelty? If you say the investors and the companies that you're describing clearly have confidence that there's a business model here because it's billions and billions and billions of dollars that are going into something that doesn't have a business model, right? So is this a Clubhouse moment where it's shiny and glossy and for a minute there's, hey, check this thing out. But then, like you said, who's the customer for it? Is anybody going to pay to generate a song that may or may not sound like the music we're used to listening to, even though it's based on that music? Or are there specific use cases where it actually makes sense? And if there's specific use cases, they may be so specific that the actual total addressable market is not the same as a social media company. It's not 500 million people might not actually even care to make a song. We don't know. So I appreciate your perspective on that. And my thinking was it feels a lot like, to me, it feels less like a Napster moment and more like a YouTube moment where content is getting repurposed. It is derivative content. Whereas Napster was literally just posting stuff. Like it wasn't derivative. It was just underground, illegal posting of content. It made me wonder if there was a market for it, someone could create what content ID is for YouTube. What is the way to monetize? And then everybody's incentivized. It's a win-win. But only if somebody actually wants to make songs this way, right? So, okay. So the other big issue that you brought up early in the conversation that I just want to dig in a little more, you talked about the kind of the shifting of power as you look at those investments from majors and indies and even DIY. You talked a little bit about this when you were talking about Create Music, but also around Tencent and Spotify and the majors investing all these different ways. I'm curious, how do you think this balance of power between majors and indies will play out in the next 5 and 10 years? And is this a thing that people should be fighting about? Or is this just a natural progression of the market? How is it going to change how music works?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what's happening in live music is a harbinger maybe of things to come. If we look at how the current administration is, even actually to my surprise, even the current administration is investigating like the live music industry. I think they just released an executive report or statement on ticket scalping, which is so interesting, especially as like StubHub is planning to go public. And then the previous administration kicked off the investigation into Live Nation and their monopoly status. I think we definitely see the impact of consolidation in live music, where arguably, because there are only a select few players that control so much of the infrastructure, it leads to potential concerns about diversity or like opportunity for certain kinds of artists or scenes to really come up, have an opportunity to perform, especially when we think about Live Nation owning so much of the, not just venues, but so much of the other parts of the business workflow behind the scenes of promoting and booking as well. So if we translate that to the music side, I think that's an interesting debate around like whether this consolidation will lead to even more shrinking of like diversity of voices that are heard, will lead to more homogenization of culture, what we hear on the radio, which is already so homogenized already. I think that's, I guess, to start off, like one reason to be concerned, like even just culturally, philosophically about consolidation, not to mention the business opportunity, the impact of potentially shutting off competition. once you get to monopoly level. I think the Downtown acquisition is still pending, at least as of this conversation. This is also a situation where I actually am not sure what the outcome is going to be. I can see the acquisition going through, and then maybe that kicking off further potential investigation from maybe other jurisdictions, because there was a whole new law introduced over the last few years around like streaming and fair compensation for artists around streaming in the US. So all the pieces are there for there to be more regulatory scrutiny of major consolidation of indie companies. I wouldn't say I'm the expert in terms of understanding why that hasn't happened already, but maybe there's a perception that anyone can still upload to Spotify or SoundCloud or wherever and start earning a cent, start earning some money from music. It's perceived to be a very open marketplace. I think obviously if you look at the numbers, very much still stacked towards the head in terms of like bigger stars capturing the majority of the share.
And the power of negotiation as you get more and more market share being something there in terms of royalty rates and other compensation, I guess. But okay. Yeah, nobody knows the future. And it was super helpful to hear you just reflect and talk through some of that. So thank you for that. We got to take one more quick break. And I have just a couple more questions after that. I want to ask you a little bit about your career and about the transformation of water and music. We'll be right back.
Music Tectonics early bird tickets are on sale now. Head over to musictectonics.com to get yours before the price jump on August 19th. Will I see you in Santa Monica at the best music tech conference of the year?
Cherie, you did something amazing with your career. You invented your role of being an independent music tech journalist and analyst. Super cool. Role model for all of us. You turned it into a subscription-based newsletter. And then during the height of decentralized autonomous organizations, you transformed water and music again. What has this all been like for you?
Yeah, it's been definitely a whirlwind. A philosophy that I've always tried to embrace, whether through water music or through earlier in my career, is that if I'm writing about innovation, I should practice what I preach, at least to some level. Especially if I'm getting to the point of recommending what are some paths that people could take, given how tech is changing, I should have my own point of view on that based on my experience with technology. I know this is like a contrast to how some other people think about tech, but I also very strongly believe that the best way to build a critical view of what's happening with tech is to engage with it. I don't think only observing from afar and speculating or complaining without actually engaging with it and understanding what a given technology really can or cannot do will only really get you so far. Whereas, just having that holistic understanding, so important. So I've applied that. Like, a newsletter is not innovative tech, but I had my own newsletter pre-Substack. So It was so fascinating to start the water music newsletter, see companies like Substack really take off in the kind of following 3-4 years, and then me really being able to have like almost a front row view and experience on how that was evolving, and then being able to apply that, even if indirectly, to my understanding of topics like fan communities or how do you like nurture a community online. That was super helpful. And then you mentioned the DAO era of water music. So this was over COVID when there was just so much interest from the music industry in alternative models for monetizing music and monetizing fans. I also realized on my side at Water Music that certain trends like Web3, because it was so early and there was not that much like press coverage about what was really happening on the ground, I had to involve the community in doing the research in some way, whether in letting us know about projects, like submitting to our database, or doing interviews with their peers who were releasing projects and compiling all of this into these very large scale crowdsource reports that we put together. And through that, like, I shamelessly say that NFTs actually helped bootstrap like a lot of our research for a few years, which is crazy. That's not something I would have foreseen in like 2015, but like through direct Web3 native support, we're able to compensate all these contributors and put out these amazing reports. Yeah, obviously the market is different, and so we've not been as involved on the Web3 side accordingly, but still follow it very closely, and whatever we are focusing on, embracing with and experimenting with the tech as we are researching it. AI is a great example. I mentioned 11 Labs. We were one of the first, I think we were one of the earliest people to apply 11 Labs AI narration to our own newsletters. So I used to have a free newsletter series, and just for a few issues, like 3 or so, our developer Alex made an AI model of my voice and had it narrate the article and just put it on SoundCloud.
Oh.
Because it was my article, I wrote everything. I was totally comfortable with having that experiment out. It's still on SoundCloud, I think on the Water Music channel, if people want to look that up. But just that experiment, and also in that case, realizing how cumbersome it was, like there actually was a lot of editing involved in that process of getting it to be a good reading experience. I was like, oh, this really is not just like a one-click fantasy that a lot of people are fearful about. There's actually still a lot of creativity and discernment involved. So yeah, just throughout, building a critique and opinion on tech by engaging with it has been our philosophy.
Yeah, no, that's great. The experimentation and try the samples, is a great way to approach it, and has definitely seen in the output of what you guys have done, both in terms of rallying a community to help with research, but also just your knowledge base and being able to talk about things because you've actually played with them and so forth. Well, Cherie, this has been an amazing conversation. I'm super grateful that you took the time to dive in on the Ouroboros project. If people want to get involved, you still have membership, waterandmusic.com. Is there anything else you want to say about how people can get the full reports and be engaged with Water and Music?
Yeah, if you're not familiar already with Water and Music, the best way I would say is to sign up for our free newsletter. There's a link at the top of our homepage, as you mentioned, waterandmusic.com. We're also very active on LinkedIn. If you want to follow me and or the Water Music page there, that's the best way to keep up to date, especially on our webinars, as well as our longer reports. We're also on X and Instagram. Our handle is water_and_music on those platforms.
Cherie, this has been a blast. Thanks so much for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Music Tectonics. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. We have new episodes for you every week. Did you know we do free monthly online events that you, our lovely podcast listeners, can join? Find out more at musictectonics.com. And while you're there, look for the latest about our annual conference and sign up for our newsletter to get updates. Everything we do explores the seismic shifts that shake up music and technology, the way the Earth's tectonic plates cause quakes and make mountains. Connect with Music Tectonics on Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. That's my favorite platform. Connect with me, Dmitri Vitsa, if you can spell it. We'll be back again next week, if not sooner.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.